so you can get out of it?
Well, I think we're all a wee bit guilty of that, and I think it does cut both ways in a relationship too. You know, like my wife was weaponised, incompetent at changing tyres, and in our when we first got married, I was, weaponised, incompetent in cooking. So, whereas now I love cooking. So yeah, I think we're all guilty of it, to be honest.
Okay, did you hear that, Sue? So Connor has used weaponised incompetence over his marital life with discretion.
I'm guilty.
Sue Bradford.
Well, I this time agree with everything Connor said. I mean, I just think that it's very tough negotiations in relationships, and relationships only last if we work these things out. And I grew up in a very gender split way, so didn't learn a lot of the male jobs, and when you grow up in this gender split way, I'm not good at changing tyres, so I'm no different than Connor's wife or partner. And so I just think, you work your way through this, and it changes through your life. Like Connor just said, he learned how to cook. Well, we can learn new jobs. So being aware that the coffee table doesn't clean itself, one of us has to clean up. But just having those gentle, in a way, it's a lifelong. I've been in a marriage for over 40 years now, and it's sort of like a lifelong negotiation about who does what. And I'm quite happy that Bill goes out and does some of those outside jobs that I'm actually not physically capable of, that I do more of something else, and that's fair enough. We're both helping out, we're both keeping the household going.
I kind of want to hear more, actually. That's interesting. 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, there's the opposite too, isn't it? There's weaponised competence, where you do a really good job so that you can do it again.
I have many more questions from both of you, actually. Many more. I wish I could keep going, but here we have, finally, the Okaho Express. Very good. Sue Bradford, Connor English, thanks for your time. I'm back tomorrow at 3:45.
Thanks, Will.
There's puppies in an apple box, pippies in a sack, riding the Okaho Express. But no one knows the difference when they're dripping.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, a mother of three's harrowing journey to have the children she is now accused of murdering. Plans for a new ram raid offence could see 12-year-olds charged and facing up to a decade in jail. The Justice Minister is here to explain how it will work. The government announces rent subsidies for displaced flood victims, but what's the shortfall? A red stickered resident is live. Calls for a scheme to take pressure off GPs and A&Es to be expanded. The New Zealand-born tabloid journalist at the centre of his own scandal. And the mission to put names to dozens of faces snapped in thousands of old photos. Maybe you can help. We'll have the details.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. A court has heard Graham Dickerson didn't believe his wife was serious when she referred to hurting or killing their children in text messages. Lauren Dickerson has pleaded not guilty to murdering their three girls in Timaru in September 2021. Dr Dickerson is being cross-examined by his wife's defence lawyer in the High Court at Christchurch via audio-visual link from South Africa. He was asked how he too shared a dark sense of humour over texts with his wife.
It's you messaging Lauren in Afrikaans. The translation is, "Wow, very nice. It seems so fun to spend time with your daughter. Now I'm glad I stopped you from killing her last night." That's an example of a joke, isn't it, between you?
The court heard Mrs Dickerson sent a message to a friend saying she thought her husband thought she was crazy. National says the government is finally admitting it's failed on crime, but doubts it can fix it. The government is making a separate offence for ram raids, which will carry a maximum jail sentence of 10 years. It'll also allow police to prosecute through the youth court 12 and 13-year-olds caught ram raiding, but only if existing interventions haven't worked. National's Justice spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says it's a desperate attempt to look tough on crime.
We're just highly cynical about the timing of it 3 months before an election. After 6 years of telling us that tough on crime stuff doesn't work and sentences don't work, suddenly 3 months before an election they're coming up with tougher sentences.
Paul Goldsmith indicated National would support the law changes despite believing they won't make a difference. Owners of flood-damaged properties in Auckland's west say the new fund for displaced residents brings a sigh of relief. The government has announced an interim payment to support people who've had to move into rentals while still paying the costs on their unlivable homes. Whakaari resident David Munro saw half of his house crumble to a slip and his family has been living in the other half. He says the fund will take away some of the financial pressure displaced families are facing. The fund will be available from September and will help cover rent costs when insurance payments run out. A leading volcanologist says the exact time and day of an eruption cannot be predicted, but volcanic activity had picked up in the months leading to the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption. GNS principal scientist Dr Jill Jolly is giving evidence in a criminal trial at the District Court in Auckland over health and safety failings in the lead-up to the 2019 eruption that killed 22 people.
Whenever we're talking about the likelihood of an eruption occurring, we have to talk in a probabilistic sense or likelihood sense, because we can never definitively say that an eruption will happen at a certain time and a certain day.
On the day of the eruption, GNS upgraded the volcanic alert level for Whakaari from 1 to 2, meaning there was volcanic unrest and potential for an eruption. The ACT Party says the Finance Minister is entirely to blame for stubborn inflation rates. Stats NZ is reporting annual inflation has fallen to 6% for the 3 months ended June, down from 6.7% in the previous quarter. Core inflation numbers, which exclude volatile food and energy prices, also remain strong. David Seymour says it's Grant Robertson's fault.
He's been the Minister of Finance for 6 years. Our economic conditions are Grant Robertson's fault now. We have out-of-control inflation in this country, and it's because of Grant Robertson's endless throwing money at every problem, which is in itself inflationary, and it's showing up in the data now.
ACT contends New Zealand is a global outlier when it comes to inflation, though the OECD average rate currently sits at about 6.5%. In sport, World Football boss Gianni Infantino has pleaded with New Zealanders to support the Women's World Cup ahead of the tournament opener in Auckland tomorrow night. 1.5 million people are set to attend 64 games across New Zealand and Australia, making it the biggest women's sports event ever. However, ticket sales have been much stronger in Australia, with almost 3 times as many sold there. Tomorrow night's match between New Zealand and Norway at Eden Park is set to be a sellout of 43,000, a record for a football match in New Zealand. But games featuring some of the lesser-ranked sides are not selling as well, and the FIFA president has urged locals to get behind the tournament.
New Zealand, we want you. We need you. It's never too late to do the right thing. Come to watch the matches. We need full stadiums to warm us all up.
Australia skipper Pat Cummins concedes a draw is at the back of his mind heading into the 4th Ashes test starting tonight at Old Trafford in Manchester. Australia lead the series 2-1 and a draw would see them retain the Ashes. Rain is also forecast for the last couple of days for the match.
We drew the 2019 series and we've all come back with pretty clear that we want to win this one. I think it's one of those things you know, as the game progresses, you maybe start working out, how risky you want to be.
And Wellington have beaten South Canterbury 67-21 in Lower Hutt this afternoon to retain rugby's Ranfurly Shield. And that's the news.
A US soldier defects to North Korea.
Crossing over into North Korea was preferable to returning to the United States to face that military disciplinary action.
A sharp reaction to Victoria dumping the Commonwealth Games.
In Bendigo, they were going to build a velodrome for the cycling and then demolish it after the Games. I mean, the word drongo does come to mind.
Would you pay $140 for a burger?
Burgers are every person's food, so hopefully it inspires people to get out and maybe try a restaurant they haven't tried before because they love burgers.
Hungry for news? Listen to Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the Met Service short forecast until midnight tomorrow from Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Cloudy periods with isolated showers, rain with heavy fall spreading south from Northland to Auckland and Coromandel later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine. Isolated showers possible tomorrow, mainly in Wairarapa. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, partly cloudy, isolated showers clearing north of Wellington overnight. Buller, Nelson and Marlborough, isolated showers spreading east, clearing in Buller tomorrow afternoon and Nelson tomorrow evening. For Westland, periods of rain with heavy falls clearing tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, high cloud, rain spreading north tomorrow morning with snow above 600 metres. Otago, Fiordland and Southland, rain with heavy falls spreading north with snow lowering to 300 metres overnight, easing to showers tomorrow morning and clearing by the evening. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with rain tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it is 5:07 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi, Anna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight we begin with a story which contains distressing content. A High Court has heard of the harrowing quest Lauren Dickerson and her husband went through to have the children she ended up killing. Graham Dickerson faced cross-examination by his wife's legal team today via audio-visual link from South Africa. The defence suggested he did not fully appreciate the gravity of Mrs. Dickerson's mental health struggles. The 42-year-old woman has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and infanticide to the murder of her 2-year-old twin daughters, Carla and Maya, and their older sister, Leonie. Today it was revealed the couple tried to conceive for 4 years before Lauren miscarried a baby girl at 18 weeks in 2013. It took 17 rounds of IVF and donor eggs for the couple to conceive their 3 daughters. Adam Burns was in the Christchurch High Court.
Lauren Dickerson's defence lawyer Anne Tui acknowledged Graham Dickerson's grief and having to relive the tragedy in court.
I want to start by acknowledging your loss, Mr. Dickerson, and how difficult evidence has been for you yesterday and might be today.
But the defence believe Mrs. Dickerson is not to blame either, arguing she was insane at the time her 3 daughters were killed in September 2021. Speaking from South Africa, Dr. Dickerson faced cross-examination today for the first time in the trial. Ms. Tui asked Dr. Dickerson about how losing a baby in 2013 took a toll on his wife.
After losing Sarah, Lauren cried every single day for 2 months, but she was very sad and distressed to lose Sarah.
The court saw footage of Dr. Dickerson's 2021 police interview yesterday, in which he said his wife wasn't a nurturing mother. The defence today asked him whether he meant those comments.
In that interview, you told police that Lauren was not a nurturing mother. Was that something that you said on the night, in the worst of circumstances, that perhaps isn't correct?
The court ruled Dr. Dickerson not be recorded in court. His statements are revoiced.
As you say, that was a very confusing moment in my life, and when I think back about making that statement, I was probably referring to the most recent times before our immigration, but not Lauren as a whole and our parenting together.
The court heard how Lauren Dickerson was diagnosed with postpartum depression in 2015. Mrs. Dickerson told her husband in 2019 that she had thoughts of hurting their children. Ms. Tui asked whether Dr. Dickerson fully appreciated the extent of his wife's mental struggles.
Lauren crying, struggling with insomnia. You talked about her thinking about suicide and verbalising that to you, thinking about harming the children. Is it possible that your assessment in terms of how bad this depression was, in terms of what you've told the police and what you've told psychiatrists, again is a subjective assessment.
Dr Dickerson told the court as first-time parents, tiredness and frustrations were factors. He admits although he couldn't diagnose it, he does not deny she was struggling mentally as a parent, but he felt there were no signs that she was ever a risk to her children. The trial continues in the High Court tomorrow.
That report from Adam Burns. It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Displaced homeowners affected by this year's weather events will receive weekly payments to help with temporary housing, while the future of their flood-damaged homes is still uncertain. Auckland Minister Carmel Sepuloni announced an interim payment to support those who have moved into rental properties and have been relying on insurance payments to cover their rent. The fund will be available from September and will help cover rent costs when insurance payments run out. Haisa Almeida reports.
Whakaari is a coastal town on Auckland's west coast and was hammered in the cyclone. It's where David Monroe saw half of his house crumble.
Our entire bedroom wing was yellow stickered because of a slip that went within sort of millimetres of the house itself. In the middle of the night, it was sort of about 10:30, and suddenly the nikau trees were rushing past the bedroom window, and we got out of there and went to a safer part of the house where we're still having to stay because there's been no progress since the cyclone in terms of what we need to do to get the yellow sticker removed.
Auckland Minister Carmel Sepuloni travelled there to make an announcement today about support for people in a situation like David's. From September the 4th, payments will be made weekly to homeowners who have had to move out of their high-risk properties and into a temporary accommodation. He says the announcement brings a side of relief.
We're lucky we were able to move to another part of the house, so we're not paying rent. But the people at Piha, and they invented this term, the homeless mortgage. So they're paying a mortgage on a house that they can't access or live in, and paying rent as well. And the announcement today will go a long way to relieve the stress on those people.
Amber Rhodes had to get out of her cottage in Whakaari when the cyclone hit.
It was actually about 6:45, so it was still daylight, and we heard a thud and the house started to be pushed off its hillside foundations by a mudslide. And my husband and my daughter and myself ran out of the house as it was sort of crumbling beneath our feet, and it was gone. It was destroyed in about 30 seconds.
Her family now lives out of Whakaari, while they are still waiting for answers on their home.
The announcement that was made today should go some way to mitigating the fear of financial pressures for the foreseeable future, and it will be a long journey, and I don't think that we can expect everything to be fixed immediately.
Sir Bob Harvey has patrolled the wild surf at his beloved Whakaari beach for 66 years. He says the fund boost will help calm the hearts of those waiting to hear about the future of their homes.
The stress on people here in this local community and their mental health, to me, are major issues. They feel isolated and they have felt, I think, forgotten. They haven't been forgotten, but Council could have been a little bit more attentive to their wants and needs.
The payment will be set at the average rent for each area. In the Auckland region, a family of 4 people in temporary accommodation would get $610 per week to cover their rent. In Hawke's Bay, the amount drops to $510, while for a Gisborne family of 4, the support will be $460. Deputy Prime Minister Carmel Sepuloni says the payment will help bridge the gap until repairs are done or a decision is made on the future of the properties.
We can't respond to all of the impacts or all of the issues today, but we can certainly provide some certainty around financial support for those that have costs for their own home as well as rentals and their insurance is running out or has run out.
For eligible owners, the payment can be backdated to June the 1st. Displaced residents can contact the Ministry of Social Development from the 21st of August to book an appointment.
Muriwai resident Caroline Balbooth has been in temporary accommodation since her home was red stickered following the extreme weather events. There's a slip at the back of her property, which she says has come down from council land. Caroline was at today's announcement and she joins us now. Kia ora, Caroline. What do you think of what the government is offering?
Good evening, Lisa. I think I'm 60% delighted with this news. And the reason I'm 60% delighted is that what I'm entitled to will cover 60% of my rent. So that's certainly not bad. I would categorise it a little bit more as meh, than 100% glad, because ultimately what has been offered, I'm confused about the equation, essentially, on what it costs to live in Muriwai, which typically rental properties here go for somewhere around $300 per room per house. And so for myself, that would entitle my husband and I to 60% of the house that we are renting.
Right, so you don't think that the government's figures are realistic, and we'll just go through a couple of them. So someone living in the Auckland area, which is you, a single person gets $330 a week, a couple with no children or a sole parent with one child, $480. So that's you. The maximum you can get is $480 a week.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so how realistic are these figures?
It's 60% realistic. It's 60% of my rent. So I'm certainly grateful for that help. Until now, through our personal resources, namely the insurance accommodation stipend that we got, meant that we could continue to fulfil our mortgage obligations as good citizens as we are, as fully as we possibly could in good faith. Now that those personal resources have run out, we're grateful for the government's support. However, we will not be able to pay our mortgage to the same extent that we were able to. Our resources ran out last week, and thusly we will need to make changes.
Is that the insurance payment, Caroline? Is it gone?
That's correct, yes, which is typically $20,000. And I guess from a really basic logistical point, if you were to say from the 14th of February, when we acquired the temporary accommodation, until this week, you divide $20,000 by that many weeks. That is the reality of what displaced people are paying in Muriwai. That may seem quite alarmist across the nation. I don't have a feel for what the rest of the displaced residents' reality is, but for Muriwai, that we've got 130 families displaced from their homes. Typically, houses go for $300 a week per room, and that's why we've run out of the accommodation supplement so quickly and our own resources.
Where does that leave you financially and emotionally if you have run out of the insurance money, you've got to cover your accommodation, this government subsidy, which doesn't kick in immediately, it's not going to get you there, and you've got a mortgage?
Well, I mean, we're used to getting kicked in the guts right now, to be honest, Lisa. I'm sort of feeling pretty numb. Look, we, again, grateful for the help, but it means that we will have to adjust, and it means that we will not be able to meet our mortgage payments to the extent that we were. That is the firm, hard reality. And maybe once other people like banks and other institutions start feeling some sort of impact from that, perhaps real care and real thought will be given from the other institutions that could be offering a hand to us in these tragic and incredibly stressful circumstances.
How helpful has your bank been?
None at all. Any offer that they've given us ultimately proves punitive to us, which is why we tried for almost 6 months to carry the weight on our own shoulders, in the hope that by 6 months on we may have received some sort of indication about the valuation of our property and indeed the categorisation of our house. Neither of those pieces of information have become open and available to us, and it seems that those dates that we have been indicated that information is coming is now pushing out further and further. So I would be very interested on when valuation is coming, and indeed when categorisation is coming, and whether that is going to happen before the next 4 months when this accommodation supplement will be revisited.
So you're in a home, Caroline, that potentially will be one of the ones where you're offered a buyout, right? Do you want to leave?
Yes.
And your fear is what? That the money is not going to cover what you're in for? In terms of a buyout?
I just need to know. I need facts. I need facts and I need commitment. What is not clear at the moment is how that house will be valued, whatever the value, because once I know that information, I can make autonomous choices for my life and start the process of moving on. Until I have those facts about what the categorisation of my house is and indeed what the valuation of that house is, because one without the other essentially means nothing, that I continue to stay in this state of limbo of 60% satisfaction whilst I slowly tread water and very slowly sink financially.
Caroline, we really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for speaking to us about this. That is Caroline Balbooth, who's a Muriwai resident. As she said, 60% pleased with the announcement from the government that they are going to help with some of the costs of temporary accommodation, but many people still have a huge shortfall. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o Whakaari, we always welcome your feedback. Please get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think about that government subsidy for temporary accommodation for people displaced by the floods. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect that the residents are saying with the average prices that the government has worked out for areas, $480 for 2 people in Auckland for rent per week. They say not realistic. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We better get to the headlines. Anna, mena pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. The husband of Lauren Dickerson, who denies murdering her 3 young daughters in Timaru in 2021, has told her High Court trial at Christchurch that he does not deny she was struggling mentally as a parent. But Dr. Graham Dickerson saw no signs she was at risk to their children, and he told the court he was wrong when he said Lauren Dickerson was not a nurturing mother. Homeowners forced into rental properties by this year's wild weather will be subsidised while they continue to fork out for their unlivable addresses. Auckland Minister Carmel Sepuloni has announced weekly interim payments from September towards rent when insurance runs out. The Greens say Labour, National and ACT are making up solutions to tackle youth crime with the election in mind, and more community-led solutions are needed. The government is to make ram raiding a separate offence and allow police to prosecute 12 and 13-year-old participants through the youth court, potentially putting them into youth justice facilities or ankle bracelets. Transport Minister David Parker has been assured there are no safety issues with the country's newest motorway, the $880 million Puhoi to Warkworth stretch north of Auckland. The Transport Agency says a landslip will be fixed by October and won't happen again. And nurses' organisation members working for Te Whatu Ora have voted for a 24-hour strike next month over pay and conditions. They're set to walk out from 7 a.m. on August the 9th at every Te Whatu Ora health service site. It is 24 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā e ho. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has made a last-ditch attempt to boost ticket sales ahead of the Women's World Cup opener in Auckland tomorrow. FIFA says ticket sales have met expectations but have been a bit sluggish on this side of the Tasman. So Gianni Infantino had a message for New Zealand today.
We need you. It's never too late to do the right thing. Come to watch the matches. We need full stadiums to warm us all up. Huh?
So do the right thing. Well, we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. What else did he have to say ahead of the tournament opener?
Well, after covering off the ticket sales and the spectacle that he expected New Zealand to be able to see at this tournament, there were some topics hot topics in football and women's football, men's football, that he kind of wanted to avoid, possibly to avoid making some of those gaffes that he made in his opening address at the Men's World Cup in Qatar last year. Some of the things he said did make him into a bit of a meme last time round. So this time, the things that he wanted to avoid were player payments, the guarantee that all nations would be getting the money, and player welfare. That was put on the back burner for this tournament. He said throughout this tournament he only wanted to focus on the positives, happiness and joy. Throughout the tournament he would only speak of positive things. So that was not exactly the answer that everybody wanted to hear today as the world's media got to ask him questions at this tournament.
Well, let's hope nothing goes wrong, Felicity, because he might be asked about things that aren't positive and happy.
Exactly, especially at a Football World Cup. But he was also given a test on his knowledge of the football ferns and their potential at this tournament and the chances. He said he saw them in France. He's been keeping a bit of a tab on them since then because, well, they're co-hosts with Australia, so he's got a bit of an interest in what actually happens there. And he acknowledged New Zealand were in a tough pool, but he switched back to being diplomatic pretty quick and said that, of course, he wanted all 32 nations at the tournament to be doing well. But he did say if there was success in the home country, it would light the fire of football here.
This tournament could be one of the last chances for New Zealand to see Captain Ali Riley pull on the silver fern, yeah?
Well, the 35-year-old defender did actually see this question coming. She knew that she would be asked whether this would be her last tournament. Would she be making a swan song at home, an opportunity to do so? She's been around the national team for more than a decade. And ahead of tomorrow's game, Ali was able to reflect on her career so far.
There's been so much heartbreak with our team, and we've believed just so strongly and still come up short so many times since 2007. But I think that what I feel when I play with this team and now being here, I want to do this forever. But I am approaching this as if, just like with every game, especially at a World Cup, like it's my last. I want to leave everything out there tomorrow night, and then if given the chance to play in the next game, I will do it again. And if I get to play the third game, I'll do it again, and hopefully we get out the group.
She did actually credit her co-captain, Rhea Percival, for actually keeping her around for the last 4 years and actually making it into this tournament in New Zealand. Ali Riley didn't say she was retiring, but she did acknowledge that this would be the last time that the current crop of Football Ferns players would be seen together.
Thank you, Felicity. That is our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. And you heard there from Gianni Infantino, do the right thing, 27 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Someone who always does the right thing, Giles Beckford, ko taku hoa e nai called Giles Beckford, to talk business. Now, Giles, inflation's stickier than treacle on a blanket. You make it sound so yummy.
If only it were. Unfortunately, the numbers out today, they're good news, and I use that with a small g, in a headline sense, so that the annual rate down from 6.7 to 6%. That was roughly in line with expectations, perhaps a tad stronger. But when you dig into them and you slice and dice these numbers and you get to the nitty-gritty, the core inflation, that's the stuff that doesn't move. Generally, it's not subject to wild volatility such as food and energy. And the RBNZ's measure of core inflation is 5.8%. It's unchanged for the past 3 quarters. That's the sticky bit. And I kid you not, sticky inflation is an official economics term. But from this point of view, it's showing that yes, fuel prices may come down and food prices may move up or down depending on weather conditions and supply chain disruptions. But when you look at it at home, the cost of building a house, the cost of living in it, the rents you pay, the rates you pay, the food you need to survive, they are the really stubborn domestic bits of inflation, which are proving doubly difficult for the Reserve Bank to knock off its perch and bring lower with all the interest rates rises that we've had over the past couple of years. It raises the question, and this is where we're starting to get into a little bit of a debate between the forecasters. Does the Reserve Bank stay where it said it was going to, at 5.5%, or will it have to do more? And on this basis, there's a minority view at the moment that there'll be one more rate rise to come before the end of the year because the Reserve Bank will lose patience. It will see that if the labour market stays tight in particular, and that of course reinforces wage pressures, then the inflation itself will take longer to come down into that 1 to 3% target band. There's the other school of thought, which is probably the one that's the majority at the moment, says that the Reserve Bank can stick to its word from the statement a week ago. It can stay on the sidelines. It can watch the numbers. It can leave the rates at this level for an extended period. And by that, we're talking about well into next year. So we'll have to pay our money, take our chance on that one. An interesting debate forming. All eyes will be on the labour market numbers that come out in a couple of weeks. The things that people will be looking for will be an increase in unemployment. And that doesn't necessarily mean mass layoffs. It just means that there are more people chasing fewer jobs available. And they'll also be looking for signs that wage pressures are starting to ease. Remembering wage pressures in the past few months have actually been able to match the rate of inflation. For now, the Reserve Bank obviously will be slightly heartened at the headline rate. It'll be a shade nervous at the core inflation pressures.
And speaking of interesting, a couple of trademark disputes, court decisions, Bed Bath & Beyond versus Bed Bath & Table, not at all confusing, Giles, and then Zuru versus Lego.
We don't often cover these sorts of things, but it's interesting. In the past couple of weeks, we've had decisions from the High Court on these disputes. They've gone different ways now. Bed Bath & Beyond, a well-known New Zealand brand, well-established. It went to the High Court claiming that Bed Bath & Table, which is an Australian-based firm, that its signage, its marketing, its name, the colour of the stuff that it put out, and the general format of the stores, they were all too similar. And it was actually in breaching Bed Bath & Beyond's trademark on its name. The High Court said, don't think so. There's enough difference between you. You're both well established. No winners here, or should we say that Bed Bath & Beyond wasn't the winner. Go ahead and do your business. The second one, which is Lego and Zuru. Well, Lego, it's a global brand. There are 600 billion Lego bits and blocks and bricks and whatever in the world, apparently. I don't know who counted them. But it's took Zuru, which is run by the Mowbray family, and it's established itself as quite a significant player in the toy market. It took it to court saying that Zuru was trying to leverage off the Lego brand. It was using the Lego name in its packaging. For instance, it was saying, our bricks are compatible with Lego bricks. It's had a couple of court cases here and in the States. The High Court here, a decision that's just been revealed in the past couple of days, says Lego's right. Zuru is aggressively trying to leverage itself off the Lego name and brand. It cannot make any reference to being compatible with Lego on its packaging. It sees, in fact, the case that was taken here as a means of trying to leverage or gain advantage in a US court case that the two are engaged in. So some interesting things there. You'd like to think from these sorts of disputes that consumers are well served, that they've come out as the bottom line winners. I suspect we'll have to take and join that queue behind the lawyers.
A person here who shall remain nameless, Giles, cannot tell the difference between those two homeware stores. Just saying. Let's take a whiz through the markets, please.
The share market, it had a positive day, but it was minuscule, just 12-point gain, 11,945. The New Zealand dollar got a bit of a spike up after the inflation numbers came out, and that was because investors were betting that rates will stay higher for longer. Since trimmed those gains, Kiwi finishes the local session 62.6 US cents and 92.2 Australian.
Thank you so much. That is Business with Beckford. Giles Beckford, live from Wellington. New Zealand-born British tabloid journalist and broadcaster Dan Wootton is denying any wrongdoing after allegations of a cash for sex images scheme. He says he's the target of a smear campaign by a former partner out to destroy his career. World Watch's Andrew McRae has more.
Dan Wootton is probably best known for breaking the story that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were giving up royal life. But now he's become the story. Accused of offering money for sexual images and using a false identity to elicit them. He has now used his own late-night show on GB News to reject what he says is a smear campaign.
I, like all fallible human beings, have made errors of judgment in the past, but the criminal allegations being made against me are simply untrue.
Dan Wootton made the on-air statement after media started to report the allegations, and the fact his former employers, The Sun and Mail Online, are investigating the allegations.
I mean, who doesn't have regrets? Should I be cancelled for them many years later? Or do you accept that I have learned and changed?
He says the blame squarely lies with his ex-partner, who has an axe to grind. A former partner, Alex Truby, says he found a hard drive in 2013 which allegedly contained explicit material and emails using a pseudonym.
And this is something I've never spoken about and is very difficult to talk about publicly, but who I was previously abused by and who has been on a campaign to destroy my life. In the past, he has written to me confessing to being a, quote, psychopath, And I saw this firsthand when he threatened in writing to, quote, slit my throat, many years after we had broken up.
Mr Wooten says he's reported his ex-partner's threats to police, who he says are investigating. The 40-year-old, who hails from Lower Hutt, says he's anti-woke and in the past has taken aim at Jacinda Ardern and Harry and Meghan.
Jacinda Ardern locked up people who I knew in a government facility as their mother lay dying down the road. The entire British mainstream media, especially Harry and Meghan's allies at the BBC, Sly News and Whakaari TV, presented a fairy tale as fact based on feelings without any investigation into what really happened. Harry and Meghan are now proven compulsive liars. Just look at the tissue of lies in that Oprah Winfrey interview.
He says his ex is working with others to bring down GB News.
He has created an untrue story about me and appears to have been working with an organisation who are intent on closing down this channel.
Wooten's current and former employers say they're aware of the allegations and are looking into them.
That report from Andrew McRae. Relief for a handful of property owners in the cyclone-stricken West Auckland community of Muriwai. Today, 5 months on from Cyclone Gabrielle, council officers changed the stickers on 11 houses, deeming some of them safe to live in once again. Duncan Leach was one of the first residents to hear the good news today and invited reporter Tom Taylor along as he moved back into his home.
Not quite a jump for joy, more of an exhausted sigh of relief. That was the reaction of Motutara Road resident Duncan Leach when council officers walked up to his door this morning.
Well, I just saw them all outside and I knew that they were meant to come and have a look, and they just wandered round and said, look, everything looks fine here. We have a liaison officer who will do a report and finalise a report and send it to us, but she said he's on holiday, so don't worry about it, just move back in and we'll get the paperwork later.
Paperwork's something Duncan's had more than enough of. He's collected 3 different coloured placards for his house as building assessors toed and froed about whether it was safe to live in. First a white, indicating it was relatively safe, then a red, prohibiting any access, and most recently a yellow, allowing restricted access. Immediately after the storm, he lived in a caravan at the Muriwai campsite for a couple of weeks, before moving into a friend's place just around the corner from his cordoned-off house. While it was yellow stickered, Duncan was only able to use his home as an office.
Just during daylight hours, was it? Correct, yeah, and then return back to our accommodation like vampires when the sun starts setting.
It's been frustrating being just a stone's throw from home, but tonight he'll be able to sleep in his own bed again. He counts himself lucky. While much of Muriwai may still have to wait more than a month for geotechnical assessments, Duncan's property falls into the so-called purple zone, a small section of houses sufficiently far from the cliffs where work was able to progress more quickly. But it's still alarming to see just how close to his property the slips occurred.
Because I've been looking at it for so long, I'm used to it. The people see it for the first time, it's quite overwhelming in the height of it, but nah. We're just used to it now. And, there's been so many other weather events and nothing's really moved. Don't feel any threat.
While Duncan's now got more certainty over his living situation, he feels for everyone else who's still in limbo.
Now it's all about trying to help them out. And then these people who got the good news today will be able to free up some other rental accommodation in the area. If most of them, I think, have stayed around the area, give other people options.
Although his stickers have all been removed, there remain questions about whether he'll be able to continue living there in the long term. But for tonight, he'll allow himself to put up his feet and claim a small victory.
I haven't really got it in my head now that I can live back home. So I'll probably have a couple of wines tonight and enjoy the hopefully clear, nice stars from my own house.
Engineering firm GHD recommended to Auckland Council late last week that 11 properties could have their placards downgraded, meaning some can return to their homes. Auckland Council Manager of Compliance, Adrian Wilson, says the wider geotechnical assessment of Muriwai is ongoing and the council expects to receive a full report by late August.
And that was Tom Taylor reporting 20 to 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o Whakaari, we're getting heaps of your feedback on the rent subsidy for people displaced by the flood. And also you got some views on the World Cup too. 2101 on text if you want to add to that conversation. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anea ana mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says society has failed children who end up committing ram raids. The government is to make ram raiding a separate offence and will allow police to prosecute 12 and 13-year-old participants through the youth court. Opposition parties say Labour only has its eye on the election. Graham Dickerson has told the High Court at Christchurch he didn't believe his wife was serious when she referred to hurting or killing their children in texts. Lauren Dickerson has pleaded not guilty to murdering their 3 girls in Timaru in September 2021. A leading volcanologist has told the Whakaari White Island Health and Safety Trial that volcanic activity was picked up in the months leading to the deadly 2019 eruption that killed 22 people. GNS's principal scientist, Dr. Jill Jolly, says on that December day the volcanic alert level was raised from 1 to 2, meaning the potential for an eruption. Russia has launched a massive air attack on the Ukrainian port of Odessa for a second night in a row. Odessa is one of Ukraine's main ports for exporting grain, and the attack follows Moscow's pledge of retaliation after Monday's blast on a bridge linking Russia to the Crimean Peninsula, which it blames on Ukraine. And Donald Trump says he's the victim of election interference after claiming he faces another federal investigation into alleged criminal behaviour. He says he's likely to be arrested within days, although there's been no official comment. It is 18 minutes to 6.
Thank you, Anna. Pharmacies in regions with slammed A&E departments say it makes no sense to cut them out of a scheme aimed at easing pressure on hospitals. The government pilot program pays pharmacies to consult on a range of minor ailments during winter and to supply funded medication in a bid to take pressure off GP clinics and A&Es. It is free to eligible patients, including Māori, Pacifica and under 14s, but it's restricted to districts that the government says it's selected based on hospital emergency department capacity and pressures. Pharmacists have written to the Health Minister saying some of the worst hit areas have been excluded from the scheme. Among them, Rotorua pharmacist Charlotte Szymanski joins us now. Hi Charlotte, why do you think Rotorua should be included in this?
Hi Lisa, I think Rotorua should be included. We've got lots of patients in that target population. We know that we've got a high level of deprivation in this area, and there are many access barriers to receiving treatments. So to be able to come into your pharmacy without having to make an appointment or, pay anything is a huge win for patients in our area.
Yeah, the government says it chose the areas based on A&E capacity and pressure on those departments. I know some of your pharmacy colleagues have been doing their own assessments, and what has that told you about those pressures?
Well, we're intrigued, especially with Waikato Hospital, which has really important impacts for Rotorua Hospital because patients that can't be treated here and in Topical get transferred to Waikato. And we know that their ED is absolutely slammed. It was all over the news on Monday morning. So we can't understand how Waikato isn't a priority hospital and the flow on there to Rotorua and Topical, which are high needs regions.
So the pharmacies there are not part of the scheme. It is not considered, no. Waikato is not considered to be in that pressured region with A&E and GPs.
No, they aren't considered to be a priority hospital.
So what are you seeing in terms of sickness this winter?
Well, over the school holidays, there was gastro bugs going around. So one of the real problems with gastro is that it causes dehydration, and to be able to easily nip that in the bud before it becomes a bigger problem, it would be amazing. And under the scheme, we would have been able to give out electrolytes, especially for young kids, for free, without having to go to a doctor, for free, and avoiding the downstream effects of dehydration. So that's something that would be key. Also with, winter colds and flus, pain is a big thing. And so Māori, Pacifica and under 14s can come into the pharmacy, get pain relief for free, and avoiding some of those, lost time at work, all that kind of stuff, which impacts on everyone's daily lives, especially when we're in a cost of living crisis as well.
Yeah, how hard is it for people to get into a GP in your region too, Charlotte?
I believe it's quite tricky depending on which medical centre you're at. I heard of one person yesterday who couldn't see their GP for 4 weeks.
Right, and so that means that's time for a condition to escalate, right? What do you know about the cost of hospital care or a night in hospital versus the $25 that the government would be subsidising a pharmacist to see a patient in the initial stages of illness?
My understanding is that an admission to hospital is about $503, and if that involves an overnight stay, it bumps up to about $7,000.
So you think it would make a significant difference to expand this program?
Well, I have an issue because they're calling it a pilot. So it's been rolled out to 825 pharmacies. There's about 1,000 or slightly more pharmacies in New Zealand. So I don't think that it's a pilot, that's a rollout. And so it really doesn't make any sense to exclude 20% of pharmacies.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Rotorua pharmacist Charlotte Szymanski there, who believes that scheme, it's called a pilot by the government, should be expanded to more pharmacies around the country. A leading volcanologist says the exact time and day of an eruption cannot be predicted, but volcanic activity had picked up in months leading up to the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption. Dr. Jill Jolly is giving evidence in a criminal trial over health and safety failings in the lead-up to the 2019 eruption that killed 22 people. Amy Williams is covering the case.
On the day of the eruption, GNS upgraded the volcanic alert level for Whakaari from 1 to 2, meaning there was volcanic unrest and potential for an eruption. Levels 3 to 5 are for various stages of eruption. But GNS Science's principal scientist, Dr. Jill Jolly, told the court that it can only assess the likelihood of an eruption.
Whenever we're talking about the likelihood of an eruption occurring, we have to talk in a probabilistic sense or likelihood sense, because we can never definitively say that an eruption will happen at a certain time and a certain day.
Dr. Jolly says GNS had been monitoring Whakaari closely. A court document shows the likelihood of an eruption on Whakaari had tripled in the 2 months leading up to the deadly eruption in 2019.
Volcanoes are inherently unpredictable. We are monitoring the various parameters, and the level of activity can be interpreted as showing changes to the probability of an eruption.
Dr. Jill Jolly told the court that forecasting volcanoes is an uncertain science due to the unpredictable nature of what's happening underground.
Monitoring and forecasting volcanoes is very like forecasting weather, except you've got your eyes closed. With weather forecasting, you're collecting a whole load of data, and you can look out the window and see what's happening.
She says GNS experts could advise tour operators about volcanic alert levels, not what action they should take.
While GNS are able to provide advice on the volcanic activity and hazard, it is not their role to advise against visiting the island.
WorkSafe prosecutor Christy McDonald KC asked Dr. Jolly if this was a hard and fast rule.
Does GNS have any power to have any impact on anyone visiting the island or not?
No, we have no power.
The 3 owners of the volcanic island and 3 companies are facing charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. They deny the charges, which allege they failed to take adequate steps to prevent serious injury or death. Opening the trial, prosecutor Christy McDonald KC explained that WorkSafe alleges the owners failed to get expert advice on how the tours could be conducted safely.
First, a failure to ensure that adequate risk assessments had been undertaken. Secondly, a failure to consult with GNS about the hazards and risks of Whakaari. And 3, a failure to monitor and review known hazards on Whakaari.
In May, GNS Science pleaded guilty to charges relating to the risk it put helicopter pilots in during field trips to the volcanic island. The trial continues.
It is 10 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Putting names to faces is exactly what Te Papa and the Wellington Indian Association is hoping to do with a series of mystery portraits. About 4,000 photographic negatives were discovered in a cupboard at a former studio in the capital in the 1990s. Now, they include 95 portraits of early Indian immigrants taken at the Cuba Photographic Studio in the 1930s and 40s, but they could just be the start. Now the museum and the Wellington Indian Association have teamed up to try and identify the people in the photos. And joining us now from the association is Lalita Kasanji. Hi Lalita, this is super interesting. Give us a bit of a taste of what these photos are like.
Well, the photos of very elegantly handsome gentlemen and a few women, of course, but they're very few and far between.
And are they in their kind of Sunday best, very posed? I mean, give us a sense of that.
They are in their Sunday best, slicked back hair, probably used Brill cream or whatever product was around in those days. Immaculately dressed, ties, waistcoats, jackets, sports jackets. There are some gentlemen with their turbans, some are moustached, and, some of them could be young men, even in the 2020s. It's, pretty timeless photographs.
It's sort of, does it give the impression it was a special occasion? Do we know anything about why these photos were taken and who took them?
So they would have been taken most probably for passports. So some of the photographs that we've seen would have been cropped for either passports or for other licenses possibly.
So you were given a particular photo, I understand, to see if you could find out who it was. Tell us what happened with that.
So we've got a working relationship with Te Papa, particularly my mother, Ruxmini, and with Stephanie Gibson. And I think it would have been about April, May. She said, look, we've got these portraits, and do you know who this person is? So she sent across a portrait, and I said, oh, I wonder if that's my dad. And anyway, I took it to Mum, and my mother had a quick glance at it, had a chuckle, and she said, oh, that's your father. And she said, there's actually
shocked?
A passport.
I mean, I know you had perhaps an inkling, and I'm looking at the photo of him in his blazer with his hair slicked back. I mean, to have a passport photo that looked that fabulous, but were you kind of blown away by how serendipitous that was?
Absolutely. And we've got all the passports of Dad, and so out came the bag where the passports were, and sure enough, that was Dad. Probably about 27 years of age in that photograph.
Why is it so important to find out who these people are and a little bit of their story?
Because a lot of these people would have been the very early immigrants to New Zealand. Some of them would have, like my grandfather, came out in 1912, being part of the British Empire, being British subjects, travelled to New Zealand would have been easy enough for them. And a lot of them would have been possibly involved in establishing the different Indian associations in the country back in the 1920s.
And people can view the photos where if they think they might be able to help?
They can go to the Wellington Indian Association website, wia.org.nz, also the Te Papa website. The Wellington Indian Association have also got a Facebook page, so Fantastic. It can be viewed there.
Well, we'll direct people there. And interestingly enough, since this story ran, we understand someone else has been identified, so that's pretty amazing as well.
It's chugging along.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. That's Lalita Kasanji there. And since RNZ's newly launched Asia unit first reported the story about these mystery portraits today, journalist Gaurav Sharma got a message from a man called Navtesh Singh Randhawa, who is a National Party candidate from South Auckland, and he told Gaurav that another of the photographs featured in the article is in fact his great-granddad, Inder Singh Randhawa. So that's pretty interesting. Do check them out and see if you can help out out with identifying them. It's the final countdown for the first match of the FIFA Women's Football World Cup. In just over 24 hours, the first match will kick off. The Football Ferns versus Norway. Our reporter Louise Snuth and camera operator Nick Monroe caught up with some of the other teams and witnessed the finishing touches to preparations for the country's biggest sporting event.
Argentina got the Auckland welcome this morning with rain falling on their training session. A large crowd came to watch them train at Michael Avenue in Ellerslie, plenty of them youngsters who couldn't pass up the opportunity.
So you guys are looking forward to the World Cup?
Yeah.
Have you snuck out of school to be here?
Yeah.
It's really cool. I don't know. Nothing really quite like it has happened in New Zealand yet, so it's really exciting.
For the girls, it's really, really inspiring.
After training was cut short due to the downpour, fans flocked to get footballs and shoes signed. Some even brought roses for the players. Followed by dancing, singing and photos with the World Cup's official mascot, a football-loving penguin, Tazuni. Meanwhile, the Portuguese team were out taking a look at some real animals at Auckland Zoo.
Welcome to Auckland Zoo this morning. Called Tailina Tukuingoa.
In their matching green and blue puffer jackets, they admit having a World Cup during winter is taking some getting used to.
It's not too cold for you?
It's a little bit because now it's summer in Portugal and it's a lot of sun, and here it's not so much sun, but it looks like today it's kind of good day.
But they're enjoying the Kiwi hospitality.
People are very friendly and they're very welcoming. Every time we go on the street we have like hello and like people curious about where we come from. And it's just nice to see the culture and like experience something different.
And we're hoping to see the bird version on today's visit.
I'm excited to see the kiwi, of course, because it's like the image of the country for foreigners.
Aside from the activities, both teams are gearing up for their matches, which will be screened at the FIFA Fan Festival at the Cloud in downtown Auckland. Santha Brown is the host city lead for Auckland. She says they're expecting as many as 2,000 people to gather here to watch games on the big screens.
So over the 24 operational days, we're going to have over 85 different performing artists and cultural activations, so a lot of live performances with some really great headline artists.
Out the back of the Cloud, they've also set up a futsal-sized football pitch on the wharf.
If you can't be at the stadium, this is the next best place to be to experience a festival in football.
Sports science student and football fan Olivia Cundy is one of the 2,000 volunteers for the festival.
I'm definitely a big passionate fan for women in sport. I don't think there's enough coverage compared to the men, and having this big event here, I don't think people realise how massive it actually is and how many people are going to watch from all over the world.
She says we're incredibly lucky to have athletes of this calibre in our little part of the world.
It will be such an incredible experience. I think especially for kids as well, like so young, and get this opportunity to go to see the highest level of women professional sport is such a major thing that people just need to become involved with, I think.
FIFA is expecting around 2 billion viewers globally. Festivities at the Cloud commence at midday tomorrow, with the World Cup opening ceremony beginning at 6:30 p.m. and the first match between New Zealand and Norway kicking off at 7.
A lot of your feedback coming in on the government's announcement about a rent subsidy, basically, for those people displaced by the severe weather. This person says this issue is not new. Being displaced for 4.5 years post-quake makes what I am hearing sound very familiar. A lot of residents saying it's only going to cover partial costs. Peter says the banks are appalling. Words fail me. Another says, Muriwai, good on the government, shame on the banks. They gave mortgage holidays when COVID struck. That from Karen. And another person says landlords need to come to the party too. That poor woman in Muriwai, says another listener, while the banks make $300 per second profit. Don't know about the maths, but I'll take your word for it. And this one from Terry about the FIFA World Cup. Does the FIFA boss not know that without free KFC or a pie, New Zealanders do not do anything? That is from Terry Twynham. Thank you for that, Terry.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Lauren Dickerson's defence lawyers have suggested her husband did not fully appreciate the gravity of his wife's mental health struggles. The 42-year-old has pleaded not guilty to murdering her 3 daughters in Timaru in September 2021. Graham Dickerson was today cross-examined by the defence in the High Court at Christchurch via audio-visual link from South Africa. Defence lawyer Anne Tui's asked whether Dr Dickerson fully appreciated the extent of his wife's mental struggles.
You talked about her thinking about suicide and verbalising that to you, thinking about harming the children. Is it possible that your assessment in terms of how bad this depression was, in terms of what you've told the police and what you've told psychiatrists, again is a subjective assessment?
Graham Dickerson says he never felt his wife was ever a risk to their children. The Prime Minister says society has failed children who end up committing ram raids, and as a result, it's failing their victims. The government is introducing stricter legislation to make ram raiding a separate offence, as well as allowing police to prosecute 12 and 13-year-olds through the youth court. It means those young offenders could be put into youth justice facilities or given ankle bracelets. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says nobody wants to see children committing these offences in the first place.
I'm not going to write these kids off. If they're 12 years old, they've got a whole life ahead of them, and I'm not willing to just give up and say, OK, they're going to spend their life in and out of prison. We can do better than that.
The Prime Minister says intervention programs have worked for 3/4 of offenders, but the tougher penalties are needed for the remaining quarter. Owners of flood-damaged properties at Karikari in Auckland's west say the new fund for displaced residents brings a sigh of relief. The government has announced an interim payment to support people who have had to move into rentals while still paying the costs on their unlivable homes. In February, Karikari resident David Monroe saw half of his house crumble to a slip. He says the fund will take away some of the financial pressure.
We're lucky we were able to move to another part of the house, so we're not paying rent. But the people at Piha, and they invented this term, the homeless mortgage. So they're paying a mortgage on a house that they can't access or live in, and paying rent as well. And the announcement today will go a long way to relieve the stress on those people.
The fund will be available from September and will help cover rent when insurance payments run out. Russia has launched a massive air attack on the Ukrainian port of Odessa for a second night in a row. A spokesperson for the Odessa military administration, Sergei Bratchuk, says the attack was very powerful and truly massive. The attacks on Odessa, one of Ukraine's main ports for exporting grain, followed a pledge of retaliation by Russia after a blast on a bridge linking Russia to the Crimean Peninsula on Monday that Moscow blamed on Ukraine. Ash from a volcanic eruption in Papua New Guinea has covered vegetation, destroyed food gardens and contaminated rivers and streams used as water sources. Mount Bagana in the autonomous region of Bougainville began spewing out ash and lava early last week. On Monday, people living in nearby villages were ordered to evacuate. The Torokina Disaster Coordinator team leader, Boniface Whakaari, says 2 days after the order, some are yet to move.
Basically, some of them maybe they feel that it's not really a big problem, but it's taking such months. But it's part of they are more don't need to get more information.
A level 3 warning is in place for what has been called a mild eruption. Nurses' organisation members employed by Te Whatu Ora are continuing to fight for better working conditions by taking strike action. They've voted overwhelmingly in support of a 24-hour strike next month, unless members vote to ratify a recently received offer. It says members will work with Health NZ to do their best to provide life-preserving services at all hospitals for the duration of the strike. Chief Executive Paul Galter says members are fed up.
Nurses have suffered the brunt, not just of the pandemic, but of what's happened since the pandemic. And now we're in the middle of winter, and all these shortages, etc., have all come back again. And now we've got the chronic understaffing continuing, but made more acute because of winter.
Members are also set to vote on a pay equity offer from the government and Te Whatu Ora in a ballot opening next week. Police say cordons are in place in central Hamilton as they respond to an incident in Frankton. They say the area affected includes Bandon Street west of Greenwood Street, including Smith and Allen Streets. No more details are available, but the police ask people to avoid this area and obey any instructions from emergency services. Police in the US state of Nevada have searched a house near Las Vegas in connection with the killing of rapper Tupac Shakur nearly 3 decades ago. No arrests have ever been made in relation to his death. Shakur was killed in a drive-by shooting in 1996 while sitting inside a car. Las Vegas police haven't provided details about this week's search warrant. Licensed pubs will be able to stay open without having to apply for a special exemption to televise the Men's Rugby World Cup. Time zone differences mean that many matches played in France will be broadcast outside the maximum trading hours for local businesses. Legislation extending trading hours so bars can televise games in the early hours of the morning has passed its third and final reading. The bill exempts existing licence holders from a special application process, requiring them to provide written notice to the police and local council instead. Extended trading hours only apply to premises televising live matches. And that's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, Mary Holm on the mortgage crunch and what you can do about it, from changing the term of your mortgage to switching to interest only. Plus on sporting history, Eric Murray, who won back-to-back gold medals in the men's rowing events at the 2012 and 2016 Olympic Games. He joins me to talk about what went right and how he and Hamish Bond stayed so dominant for so long. That's on Afternoons with me, Jessie Mulligan, from 1 p.m. tomorrow on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast until midnight tomorrow from Met Service. From Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, cloudy periods with isolated showers, rain with heavy fall spreading south from Northland to Auckland and Coromandel later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine, isolated showers possible tomorrow, mainly in Wairarapa. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, partly cloudy, isolated showers clearing north of Wellington overnight. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, isolated showers spreading east, clearing in Bulla tomorrow afternoon and Nelson tomorrow evening. For Westland, periods of rain with heavy falls clearing tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, high cloud, rain spreading north tomorrow morning with snow above 600 metres. Otago, Fiordland and Southland, rain with heavy falls spreading north with snow lowering to 300 metres overnight, easing to showers tomorrow morning and clearing by the evening. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, rain tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it is 6:08. You're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Nothing short about that forecast, Anna.
It wasn't that short, was it? No.
No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A survivor of abuse at Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital says he feels fobbed off by the New Zealand government's response to questions by the United Nations Committee Against Torture. New Zealand officials fielded questions in Switzerland overnight about findings that 2 patients at the facility were tortured in the 1970s. They say they've made progress on UN orders to provide compensation and apologies. But as Jimmy Ellingham reports, criticisms remain about the government's handling of the case, not least by survivors themselves.
During the UN's regular review of New Zealand's adherence to the Convention Against Torture, it didn't take long for Lake Alice to come up.
During the reporting period, this committee rendered decisions on 2 other complaints, one filed by Mr. Zenfeld, the other by Mr. Richards. And at both, the committee found violations of Articles 12, 13, and 14 of the Convention. The committee should welcome an update on domestic developments with respect to both cases.
Malcolm Richards and Paul Zentfeld received electric shocks and paralysing drugs as punishment during their time at the Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital, as well as ruling they were tortured at Lake Alice. In its decisions from 2019 and last year, the UN committee ordered the government to take action. New Zealand's Justice Secretary Andrew Kibblewhite summarised what's happened since those orders were made.
As people know, the committee issued decisions on the individual communications, Mr. Zenfeld and Mr. Richards, relating to Lake Alice, and found there was a breach, as noted earlier, and urged the New Zealand government to provide Mr. Zenfeld and Mr. Richards with access to appropriate redress, including fair compensation.
A system for the redress and compensation of survivors of abuse and state care is not yet in place, although there is work happening to develop such a system. Some former Lake Alice unit patients received small payments as part of a class action settlement 2 decades ago, but there was no acknowledgement of torture.
We have published those decisions in New Zealand on the websites of the New Zealand Police, and they've been made available and published on the Crown response to the Abuse and Care Inquiry to ensure that they are well disseminated.
This is disputed by the Citizens Commission for Human Rights, which helped Mr Zentfeld and Mr Richards with their UN cases. The Citizens Commission says few people will see the decisions if they're only published there. Mr Kibblewhite continued.
There will be references to Lake Alice and those specific decisions as part of the public national apology for abuse and care, which is to be delivered after the Royal Commission provides its final report.
Mr Kibblewhite says the UN findings note that something more than the settlement of 2 decades ago is needed.
There are 2 broad ways that has been responded to. The most substantial one is through the report and the government's response of the Royal Commission to Abuse in Care. Though in addition to that, the Minister for the Public Service has asked officials to see whether there are some other options that could be looked at ahead of that time.
Mr Richards told RNZ the government's response is a fob-off, especially in referencing the compensation from 2 decades ago. He says no rehabilitation was provided after that, and he reiterated that torture was never mentioned in that settlement. Mr Kibblewhite told the UN committee it's clear Mr Richards and Mr Zentfeld aren't alone in suffering as they did.
The experiences, we would note, of both Mr Zentfeld and Mr Richards and the committee's decision, noting that what they experienced as children was torture. It is likely that other children at the institution have also experienced torture, and that will be a really important part of looking at appropriate redress for survivors of abuse and care, and particularly from Lake Alice.
The 3-hour session covered plenty of ground, including questions about deaths in custody, New Zealand's response to acts of terror, and the country's high imprisonment rate for Māori. Officials face more questions tonight.
And that report from Jimmy Allingham. The government's creating a new ram raid offence that could see children as young as 12 charged, with the proposed law carrying a maximum 10-year jail sentence. In announcing the changes, the PM made this admission.
We have been failing as a country to deal with the youth offending that we are now seeing, and we need to do more. We have also been failing the victims of these offences, and we need to do more.
Right now, burglary charges can cover ram raid offences, but the government says repeat child offenders whose age and crimes don't meet the criteria for youth court can escape charges. The new offence would mean there are more options for police in Oranga Tamariki to deal with young criminals, and the law will also apply to some passengers in ram raid vehicles. Justice Minister Kiri Allen joins us now. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Good evening, Lisa.
In simple terms, why do we actually need this when some of those other laws can be applied?
Yeah, very simple terms. It is targeted towards essentially younger people, 12 and 13-year-olds in particular, to provide more tools for those decision makers who have to assess these young people coming in and out. We've had 153 children that have committed ram raid offending since the start of last year. 77% of them are being dealt with very effectively through the prevention type interventions that we've introduced over the course of the past year. But it leaves us still with this 23% where New Zealanders rightly can expect that we can get different outcomes. So that's really what the focus of the amendments we introduced today are.
How many of those 153 children are 12 and 13-year-olds?
Yeah, so that is the number for those younger children that would be eligible.
So those are all 12 and 13-year-olds?
Yeah, or defined as children, yeah.
Okay. So it's not for first-time ram raiders, you've said. It's for the worst repeat offenders. So how do you picture that this will be used?
Yeah, so look, I think it's good to think about this as being tiers. There's tiers of options available for decision makers. So look, if you've got a young 12-year-old person, they want to go out and experience some, if they get into the wrong club, whatever they're doing, they they commit ram raid, those intensive interventions, those might work really well. And like I said, they work really well for 77% of kids. But there's that persistent, ongoing hardcore group, 23%, which those initiatives just aren't getting to. So what we've done is really create options for the police and for prosecutors to be able to essentially make a decision. Do they want to charge them pursue action in the family court? So we've expanded the ability for them to be able to do that. That's what Minister Davis announced yesterday. And then today we've also gone another step further, is to say, well, for those 12 and 13-year-olds where other initiatives haven't worked effectively or efficiently, here are some broader tools for decision makers to be able to use. And it kicks in the tools that are available in the youth court. So this can include things like parenting orders and, orders for alcohol and drugs and the like.
Okay, I'm still confused. So, 13-year-olds, right, they can already be charged with aggravated robbery and burglary, and they have been in relation to ram raids as recently as this year. So what is the difference? Why not just use the law that you have as it exists?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest difference, Lisa, is that 12 and 13-year-olds cannot be charged in the youth court for this particular type of offending. So police will say, actually, the ram raid offending for those 14 years and upwards, they've got the tools that they require. But there's a substantive cohort that sit under that 14-year-old bracket, those 12 and 13-year-olds, and like I said, 153 of them, that they don't consider that there's been a satisfactory way to get to some of those young people.
Okay, Minister, can I get you, to pause for a second. So essentially what you are saying is that you want a serious charge that you can apply without escalating these young offenders to an adult court. You want to be able to charge them with an offence and keep them in the youth court.
Quite. Yeah, no, not quite. So you can't charge right now unless it's for a particular type of offending. If it's an aggravated burglary, so young person, 12-year-old, they go and commit a ram raid offence in a shop and they're carrying a batch, and they've got a weapon, they can be charged with aggravated burglary. That carries a maximum penalty of 14 years and they can be prosecuted in the youth court. But a majority of them aren't carrying weapons, so they've been charged with burglary, which carries a maximum of a 10-year penalty, and they aren't been able to be prosecuted in the youth court. So they're going through to family courts, and that's where you see the processes available, like the family group conferences and those other measures. Now we've strengthened that avenue, but still there is still a group that we consider actually we can do more for. And
so
like
it's more nuanced. It's more nuanced and it applies to younger people. Okay, so why are you just doing this now, so close to an election where in the past you yourself even have said that tightening up sentencing laws would lead to more victims, yet here you are doing exactly what you spoke against?
Yeah, this isn't sentencing laws though, of course, is it? So it's really
still a strong penalty attached to this.
No. So it's still the same maximum penalty of 10 years, which is carried through from burglary. So we're not touching the sentencing side of things. We're touching the way that people can access the plethora of tools that are available to be able to assist these young kids ultimately, and then of course New Zealanders. So what we're doing. So why now? I think that it's fair to say that we are always and have been working incredibly hard to make sure that we don't just do knee-jerk stuff reactions. I'm really opposed to that. We as a government are opposed to that. And we've always said that we'll rely on evidence. What the evidence has shown us is that the prevention measures that we've introduced, those wraparound supports, providing, making sure that those young 12-year-old Jimmies are getting the support they need, by and large, that's working. But it isn't for a particular cohort. So we've recognised that there still is this gap in the system, and that's what we're trying to do here. We've worked very hard to make sure that that we're not going overboard and being too hard in creating, a trajectory which is a lifeline of crime. And it's been a balanced kind of approach, I think. But what the decision
Minister,
is today...
we're almost out of time, so I want a one-word answer from you, please. Can you get this done by the election, before the election? Yes or no?
We're certainly introducing the legislation before the start of before the election, yes.
Appreciate your time. That is the Justice Minister, Kitty Allen there. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fans have come out in force to welcome the Netherlands football team to the Bay of Plenty just days before the FIFA Women's World Cup kicks off. The squad chose Tauranga as its base of operations, training on a transformed cricket pitch at Bay Oval. Jordan Dunn was in Mount Maunganui to catch their first practice in Aotearoa.
The Orange Lionesses were treated to a traditional Māori welcome with songs and waiata on a clear sunny day at Bay Oval this morning. In return, the host iwi and local dignitaries got a special performance by the team themselves of their song Zie die Leeuwinnen, or See Those Lionesses. Dutch striker Lieke Martens says the ceremony brought the team closer with the hosts.
They had their welcome song and we had our song, so it felt really like we're like units, like together, and we are like feel a little bit part of their family.
However, once the formalities were out of the way, the fans were unleashed. Hundreds of football teams, school groups and those who call the Netherlands their home dressed up in the team's iconic orange, chanting their support, eager to catch a glimpse of the last World Cup's runner-ups.
It's good. It's really good. It's really good. It's really good. Yeah, not like any other. It's real good. Yeah.
Just to have it available and very present of mind certainly is just fantastic.
I think we're pretty fortunate to see some world-class athletes, and particularly at the time in world football, how it's just exploded in the last 3 World Cups.
For the young fans, it was an inspiration seeing their favourite players in person.
And it's like, one in a lifetime opportunity, so yeah. It's really cool and I really wanted to come and watch them. And I feel really happy being here. They're very good, they're very good. Very good.
And for Dutch people living in New Zealand, it was comforting having a slice of home come to them.
Awesome to see, and so many people in orange as well. It's great. I know there's a few Dutch people here, which is awesome, because we love our soccer, or football, I should say.
I'm Frisian, but that's the north of the Netherlands. And this is the possibility for us to support them, to see them, and to say, go.
The audience were chanting a traditional Dutch phrase, as these students from Arataki School put it. Once the practice had finished, players met with fans, signing merch and posing for photos. The Netherlands take on Portugal for their debut game on Sunday at Forsyth Bar Stadium in Dunedin.
Reckon the Netherlands could be a pretty good team. Just happens I got them in the sweepstake. Anyways, a US soldier is being held in North Korea after crossing the border from South Korea without authorisation. Travis King was being escorted back to the US for disciplinary reasons before he apparently gave his escort the slip at the airport. He then joined a tour group at the border and ran across to the north. US Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin gave a briefing at the Pentagon.
We believe that he is in the BRK custody. And so we're closely monitoring and investigating the situation and working to notify the soldiers next of kin and engaging to address this incident. In terms of my concerns, I'm absolutely foremost concerned about the welfare of our troop. And so we will remain focused on this. And again, this will develop in the next several days and hours.
The BBC's Sean Dilley has more.
I'd say we're still no closer to understanding what might have motivated the individual to cross into North Korea. The Pentagon very much saying as much and as little as you would expect them to. When we heard from Mr. Austin, the Secretary of State for Defence, he said that their foremost concern is for his welfare, and that was something that has been echoed by the State Department in separate statements. At this moment, the two departments are working in collaboration, but it's the military, the Department of Defence, and officials here from the Pentagon who are either directly in touch or coordinating efforts with the North Koreans, because they do believe, they said, that he is in their custody at the moment. looking at the situation from above, what might have motivated him to cross there, as I say, is still rather unresolved, and whether he still wishes to be there. But you can bet your bottom dollar that US authorities now and Pentagon officials will be working and doing everything they can to secure his release, hoping that that is a short time, not a long one.
The US military says it's had no contact with the soldier since he crossed the border. The shock cancellation of Victoria's Commonwealth Games in 2026 due to spiralling costs has sparked questions about the financial impacts of other mega events like Brisbane's 2032 Olympic Games. Brisbane's Olympic and Paralympic Organising Committee says it has almost a decade to get the balance right, but experts are wondering if a rich country like Australia can't afford to host a Commonwealth Games, what does the event's future look like? The ABC's Stephanie Smale reports.
The news of the cancelled Commonwealth Games hasn't put a dampener on the Olympic spirit in Brisbane. These locals are aware it's not cheap, but support it happening anyway.
I think it's great for culture and bring people together and that side of things.
In my head, it will create a lot of jobs, so therefore that's the balance. There'll be a lot of work around.
The amount of people that will come over from the United States, every other country that we know of, will end up benefiting our state, so why not?
So the benefit will outweigh the cost?
Yeah, of course.
And it puts us on the map.
The Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, says the Commonwealth Games price tag was going to hit $6 billion, a figure he couldn't justify given the pressures on health, housing and education in his state.
It's not a good look just to get up in the morning and say we're not hosting a Commonwealth Games.
Dr Tom Heenan is a sports lecturer at Monash University. He says the mounting financial and social costs of hosting major sporting events are causing many communities to think twice.
And it may be that we really have to look at the mega event industry. Is it really feasible to have these events that last for not even 2 weeks and they cost so much money? I've just returned from Los Angeles where I've spoken to people in the No Olympic movement there. Their comments on the Games were that we basically can't afford these Olympics in 2028 because they're going to affect marginal groups within our city.
So are you saying the cost is becoming greater than the benefit?
The cost is greater than the benefit, and it's seen by now how many cities are prepared to put forward for these events.
Brisbane's Olympic and Paralympic Committee says its business model is different to the Commonwealth Games, pointing out it's using mostly existing or temporary venues and that it's got years to focus on best case planning and preparation.
If an advanced Western society like Australia can't host a Commonwealth Games, what future do the Commonwealth Games have?
Senior University of Sydney sports lecturer Dr Steve Georgakis says Victoria's Games cancellation has huge implications. But he argues when big global events happen on home turf, the benefits do outweigh the costs.
The idea of hosting these mega sporting events such as the Olympic Games is to produce some kind of a legacy.
But is there any way to measure the benefit of that legacy?
Of course, there are everlasting benefits. I mean, one of the high points of Australian society was the time when we hosted the 1956 and the 2000 Olympic Games, or the time that we hosted the 1938 Sydney Empire Games. If there wasn't a real legacy, we wouldn't be involved in it. It wouldn't generate so much interest.
OK, some of your feedback before we head off for the night on the government bringing in a new ram raid charge that can be applied to 12 and 13-year-olds. Gary says a lot of children are not bad kids. They do bad actions because they have been told that they are bad. Someone else reckons videoing the crime should be a charge as well. Well, it's going to be a mitigating factor in sentencing. Both National and Labor have that as a policy, I believe. On the pharmacies trial, this is where pharmacies get paid for consultations and they can dispense free medication. It's to take the pressure off A&Es. This person says pharmacies can do a cheaper job, whatever happened to cost-benefit relationship studies. On the subject of the FIFA World Cup, which kicks off tomorrow, this person says, I want to take 10 people to the footy, but kids need an app. FIFA are so out of touch. A lot of you are a bit grumpy about the way the ticket sales are working. Slow World Cup tickets, this person says, increase them by allowing on-the-day gate sales. come on, tomorrow, first game. Get a tiny bit organised, you could still make it. That is all we have got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything from the program, you can check out Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. First up, hear from the first woman to play football as a schoolgirl in Manawatu way back in 1975. She's pumped for the World Cup. You'll be pumped too. 5 a.m. tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Graham Dickerson has told the High Court at Christchurch he never felt his wife was a risk to their 3 young daughters. Lauren Dickerson denies murdering the girls in Timaru in September 2021. The owners of 11 properties